They're dealing with high-end science. We just think it's a cute design and don't think of it anymore. But everywhere you see something spiritual, it's always alongside high technology. Right? Every time you see something about genes, it's some meditation pose or spirituality. Every time you see the DNA, they're talking serpents and trees. Here's the one for the countdown of war, the latest war, when war was declared on Iraq recently. This is the cover of Time magazine. They're calling it a special report. But on the front cover, you don't see troops and, and tanks and whatnot. What do you actually see? Right? Here we have a countdown to war, but we get, the main story is solving the mysteries of DNA. We're going to find out what the connection is, but look at the symbolism. Solving the mysteries of DNA, and they're showing you from the book of Genesis. The tree of life, the primal parents, and the DNA serpentine spiral. Do they know something we don't know? Now the Lemurians, or the sons of the serpents, became aware of their creator's second experiments, you see. See, on Lemuria, this other coterie of basically enlightened beings, they're not dumb, They're watching their forefathers on Atlantis, thinking they might get up to this. So the Lemurians actually do become aware of their creator's second experiments. Now they have a dilemma, realizing that the race of Adam, you see, was in fact kindred to themselves. They both possessed the human DNA. It was therefore decided that representatives would be sent to Atlantis to dialogue with the enslaved and dumbed down Adams and Eves. Thus we have the story, corrupted later, of the serpent entering the garden. So the book of Genesis is completely upside down. Completely upside down. And if you study the artwork of the great masters who knew what we're talking about today, you will see in their symbolism of the androgynous serpent and how he's trying to free as opposed to tempt anyone. Now the story goes, you see, that the sons entered into the gardens and spoke with their genetic cousins. They counseled them to throw off their chains of servitude and accompany them back to Lemuria, where they would be initiated into all that had been hidden from them. It is written that the Adams were resistant to the invitation. Right? The Adams were just not getting it. But fortunately, the responses of the Eves was different. The ancient mythologies talk about that the Eves were mysteriously attracted to these visitors and were heeding them and are basically responsible for this exodus. This is very much important to know because it ties into why women have been marginalized henceforth. In fact, Madame Blavatsky puts it this way. She says the appellation Satan, that means the word Satan in the Hebrew, belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, and not in the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. How right she is. And in book of Genesis we hear the hatred, you see, towards the female for doing this. This caption that we're going to read now is meant to be to the serpent, but it is not. It is to somebody else. And it says, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly thou wilt go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. Women committed a certain crime, quote unquote, 13,500 years ago, for which they have never been forgiven. That is why they have not held any office worth anything. Don't be fooled by what you see on today's history books. As Leonard Shlain puts it, when we look back across the historical time of patriarchy, there seems to be some terrible inevitability, a relentless desire to crush the female essence. And he admits it. This is a top scientist from San Francisco, but he admits it. The question of why is one of the most puzzling of our time. So we come full circle. What does this have to do with the origins of evil? In the preface of the Atlantis book, it says, during the next 10 years, the human race is destined to finally discover the true origins and destiny. As part of this discovery, we have to address the overwhelmingly important question of how the phenomena of evil came into the world and into the consciousness of Earth's human inhabitants. What we need to reveal now and understand is that it is this genetic transgenic experimentation. It is exactly the consequences of this experimentation that cause what we now call the evil to come into existence. It's time for that fact to be known. It's not nature that did it. Nature was in perfect balance from the biggest neutron star to the smallest quanta. Why would it put a proclivity so deadly in its highest creation to undermine its own order? To even, embody such a monstrous idea is to be utterly under the worst kind of mind control. Because if nature is dumb and made a mistake and kind of blew it, then aren't we then justified in the slaughter of nature and the degradation of nature and the indigenous people that are also in harmony with nature and the animals which are our brethren and our teachers? Look what happens when you embody such a lie. No, ladies and gentlemen, it is constant tinkering and tampering with the inviolable laws of nature that cause such things like evil to come in the world. It's not some Darwinian blunder. What a notion. How dare we think that when we have a universe in perfect balance all around us? The very word Adam means cut off or divided. Adam comes from Adom, meaning the divided one. Well, yes, if you're divided inside, if you're schizophrenic inside, if you're bipolar, we're not even talking psychologically here, we're talking genetically, right? If you have bipolarity on that depth of your level, then it echoes through your being. If we are psychologically, emotionally, genetically schizoid, aren't we going to create a schizogenic society? So you can wave all the placards you want, and you can try to, mend the problem by running around in the streets and getting into the political pigsty. But haven't we seen that nothing's ever got done that way? Because we're not even focusing on the right place. We are generating it from within. You can't scrub the outside of a suitcase to clean the laundry inside. Well, you can try. It would be a comedy for everybody watching. Comic relief. But I think your laundry is going to remain exactly as dirty as it is. You can't make a dish and just say, oh, I don't have any salt, but this stuff called sugar looks like the same. It'll do. And hope to, that you can exchange those two ingredients and that the dish is going to come out fine. Just because it looks the same. In fact, Leonard Shlain, talking about this, recounts Plato, and we read something absolutely remarkable, which has meaning for everyone here. Zeus gathered the gods in council to express his concern that these unusual creatures would one day challenge their hegemony. He was loath to exterminate them with his thunderbolts, though, because there would be no one to bring the gods offerings. No hot coffee in the morning, no remote control for the TV, it sucks, He solved the problem by putting each creature into a trance and then splitting it down the middle. Upon awakening, each half only dimly remembered what it had been prior to being cleft in two. Zeus explained to the assembled gods and goddesses the cleverness of his scheme. These creatures would no longer pose a threat to the gods because they would dissipate their considerable energy by spending the rest of their days searching for their missing halves. Does that sound familiar? Leonard Shlain goes on to say in another book, Eve's descendants have steadily accumulated the power to destroy each other in an unholy Armageddon, and like sleepwalkers are shuffling towards a planetary ecological disaster. How could a slight 5-foot-tall, two-legged animal create such sublimity and then wreak so much havoc in so minuscule an interval in Earth's history? You'll walk out that door and you'll know why. Erich Fromm, the great German sociologist and social critic, says that the detailed description of the life of primitive hunters and food gatherers has shown that man, at least as he fully emerged 50,000 years ago, was most likely not the brutal, destructive, cruel being, and hence not the prototype of man the killer that we find in more developed stages of evolution. So he's dating it. He's saying, say about before 50,000 years ago, there's no evidence to show that man had these capacities for inhumanity that we have now. And we've talked about it, I've talked about it, and even on a much higher level, philosophers and savants have always talked about it. It's a very serious question in life. What is the real difference between man, right, and the primates? Or man and beast? The only trouble is, do you really want to know the answer? It isn't pretty. Man differs from the animal, all right, by the fact that he is a killer. He, the only primate that kills and tortures members of his own species without any reason, either biological or economic, and who feels satisfaction in doing so. I've lived in Ireland, I've seen it. Tolkien was in the trenches, he saw it. It is this biologically non-adaptive, non-phylogenetically programmed malignant aggression that constitutes the real problem and danger to man's existence as a species. The most ample and horrifying documentation for seemingly spontaneous forms of destructiveness are on the record of civilized history. The history of war is a report of ruthless and indiscriminate killing and torture whose victims are men, women, and children. Many of these occurrences give the impression of orgies of destruction, in which neither conventional nor genuinely moral factors have any inhibitory effect. There is hardly a destructive act human imagination could think of that has not been acted out again and again. Shlain says that in regards to aggression, creation is a nightmare spectacle taking place on a planet that has been soaked for hundreds of millions of years in the blood of all its creatures. The soberest conclusion we can make is that the planet is being turned into a vast pit of fertilizer. The major rise in killing prowess occurred primarily in the last 100,000 years. And look at this. The sharpest spike is limited to the last 40,000. There's that date again.